Today we're going to look at inverse relations and functions, section 6-7. If a relation pairs A with B, then the inverse pairs B with A. What this means is that if you have a point x comma y in your function in a relation, then the point y comma x is in the inverse. An inverse is just switching the domain with the range. So all the y values become the x values. So if we look at a table example, if this first table represents our relation where every x is paired with a y value, then the inverse of the function would look like this, where we switch x and y. So the inverse would be -1, 0, 0, 2, 2, 3, and 3, 4. So what happens is the domain of a relation becomes the range of an inverse, and the range of the relation becomes the domain of the inverse. So let's look at some functions. Finding an inverse. What is the inverse of y equals x squared minus 1? To find the inverse, you're going to begin by switching x and y. So you're going to say x equals y squared minus 1. The operations stay where they are, and all you do is literally switch the place of x and y. So the y becomes squared and the x moves here. Functions are written in terms of y equals. So to find out what the function is, we're now going to solve for y by adding 1 to both sides. So now we have x plus 1 equals y squared. Then to get rid of the square, we take the square root of both sides, and that cancels out the squared. So we find that y inverse, which is what the -1 means, equals plus or minus the square root of x plus 1. Don't forget that every time you take a square root because of a square, you must put the plus or minus in front of it. And when you get y by itself, it becomes y to the -1, which means y inverse. That -1 shows you that this function is an inverse of this function up here. Now, to determine if something is a function or not, you need to ask yourself, for every x value that you plug in, how many answers do you get? If I plug in the number 3 here, 3 plus 1 is 4, and the square root of 4 is 2. But I have a plus or minus. So when x equals the value 3, then y will equal 2 or -2. And that's found by doing plus or minus the square root of 3 plus 1. Every x value can only have one y value, otherwise it is not a function. So this, we would say, is not a function because of the plus or minus giving me 2 answers for one x value. Whereas up here, if I plug in the value 3, 3 squared is 9, 9 minus 1 is 8. When I plug in 3, I get one answer of 8. So every x has only one answer. This is a function, but the inverse is not a function. Let's try one more example. Sometimes they will write a function or a relation as f of x. Remember that f of x is just a fancy way of writing y. So I can rewrite this equation to say y equals the square root of x minus 2. So to find the inverse, I need to switch x and y. So it becomes x equals the square root of y minus 2. Then I solve for y. Remember that when you're solving, you use SAD Mr. F. So I don't have any addition or subtraction outside, because remember, anything inside a square root is considered to be in parentheses, so it's done last. There's no multiplication or division, so I jump right straight to my root. How do I get rid of a square root? I square it. Whatever I do to one side, I must do to the other side. So the square cancels out the square root, giving me x squared equals y minus 2. Then to keep getting y by itself, I need to add 2 to both sides. So this cancels out, and I get y inverse equals x squared plus 2. Now, if I plug an x value in there, like 3 squared is 9, 9 plus 2 is 11. So for every x, there's only one y value. Therefore, this one is a function. So go to the assignment now, write down the problems, try the problems, and bring your questions in tomorrow.